My name is Logan, and I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team. Before we begin, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement, regardless of where you're joining from. I'm joining here from downtown Vancouver, so really happy to be on the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It's important, I think, to think about the land you're on and think about the natural caretakers of that land. I want to thank you for joining us for VSW 2021 and welcome you to this session today, How to Become a Digital Nomad, Work Remotely While Traveling Around the World. And this is hosted today by Career In. And if you have any questions for our speakers, if you can use the Whova chat, that would be the best place to post those questions. And also note that you can upvote questions. So if there's a great question that someone else has posted, you're welcome to kind of boost that question up. And now I'm going to pass it over to Kenneth.
Thank you, Logan, and welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for attending. My name is Kenneth, founder CEO of Career in Tech Society, a nonprofit that helps people develop their career in the tech sector. And today joining me is Cynthia. Cynthia is going to share about how to become a digital nomad and working remotely and also travel around the world. So it's looking forward to a chat with Cynthia to get to know more about her experience in doing that. And prior to working with GrowFlow now, Cynthia had been a startup founder with Altcoin Fantasy, and she had been building a distributed team. So she can also share about how to recruit remotely and also manage a remote team. So there's lots of stuff to unpack. So looking forward to this chat with Cynthia. So I'll let Cynthia start by a little bit of self-introduction, so that people get to know you a little bit more on what you're working on, and just from there, you're working with GrowFlow now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Kenneth. And I'm super excited to be a part of Vancouver Startup Week. Obviously, startups are very near and dear to my heart. So I really love that as a community, we're doing these things to foster innovation and getting more people into the startup scene.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think with the with the startup scene here, Vancouver Startup Week being one of the major startup event here in Vancouver, I would love to contribute and been involving in my 4th years now since 2018 and really
Nice.
Really enjoying the whole startup community here in Vancouver. The first couple of years I actually joined as a volunteer so that I can go into the different events and check out stuff and get to know more about the people, right? And then last couple of years I've been more involved in building the community and also building programs and startup related stuff. So I'm also quite active in the startup scene here in Vancouver. That I started the startup community called Startup and Richmond chapter, and also the Startup Boost Vancouver program, which is a P-accelerated program for early stage startups. But it's good that I think that's how we connect last year too, Cynthia, when we did the workshop with Startup and Richmond that talks about growth hacking. So thank you again for joining me and sharing your experience here. So tell us more about what you've been doing with GrowFlow and how do you get into that kind of.
Yeah. So I have a pretty varied background, I would say. I studied English literature in university. So I went to UBC and always thought that I would go into publishing or editing. And I actually started my career in insurance and then happened to become a product manager, then worked in strategic innovation and then started my own startup. And now I'm at GrowFlow, which is a B2B cannabis software out of the US. So I've had quite a number of careers already in a short time, but I would say that probably one of the things that has been really helpful for me is just being really curious and exploring a lot of different passions and interests, and one thing has sort of led to the next. So I've worked across a multitude of sectors and in different roles as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. One question that I saw from the audience before we start the section is that how do you tap into or get into the startup scene if you don't have prior experience in startup way? I think a lot of people or students that are graduating, they're interested in the startup world and they want to get into it. But since they don't have the experience, how do they start? How do you start your startup journey?
Yeah,
Or
that's
get
such
into
a great
startup.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually something I really struggled with as well. So what happened was that I thought I was going to build my career in insurance, and then just so happened that I ended up moving to San Francisco with my husband at the time, who he was really into startups, and he was accepted into 500 startups into their accelerator. So I ended up working for one of the startups in the cohort just kind of by accident, and I loved it, fell in love with it. I actually moved back to Vancouver. I really wanted to get into the startup space here, but it was very difficult because I didn't really have any experience. I didn't have any technical background. But what I did do is I started doing a lot of projects on the side and attending hackathons. And so I had this portfolio essentially of apps that I helped build, projects that I worked on that actually had traction. And because of that, I was actually able to get a job as a product manager, which was a step into the tech world for me. So I'd say if there is something that you're interested in any area of tech, definitely pursue that and start to do side projects. There are so many companies that are looking for interns that will, take on people that want to learn. And there's a lot of companies like Flick that are dedicated to helping females specifically get internships or apprentices. And that's like a really good way to get experience without having to get a job initially. And so that's like a stepping stone. I think the other thing too is that with the Vancouver tech scene, it's really awesome that you've been involved in Vancouver Startup Week for a while, because I've seen the industry in Vancouver shift a lot and grow a lot. And funny enough, I think like COVID has actually been a good thing for the Vancouver tech scene, because there's now these companies, big companies, who are going to build head offices here, which obviously accelerates our ecosystem and grows it a lot. We bring a lot of money and talent and knowledge to Vancouver, which is an awesome thing to know. But then what that means is that there's a lot of people here who have built up knowledge, who have experiences, who have networks. And so reaching out cold, I think, is underrated. Like, so many people are just so willing to help and give back to the community. Like, if someone reaches out to me, I'd for sure be happy to talk to them and, try to connect them with people that they're looking to connect with. So I think that definitely is an underrated tactic that can do a lot.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great advice. I found that, I got these questions a lot of the times from students. Now that I work with more students with career in tech, where students that are interested in getting into the tech scene, they ask these questions a lot. And I found that, like you mentioned, hackathon is like a great way to kind of tap into how to do it. And also sometimes you may be, working with a team that start a startup because of the hackathon too. I saw and met a lot of people that start the startup from a hackathon, or like a startup weekend type of event. And also, get involved in the community, like volunteer or join the community events. Now with every event being virtual now, it's harder to tap into it as like an in-person kind of thing to build up the network. But I think, you can still network and build up your professional network that way by going into the different community online meetups or online events, right? So that's very good. So you mentioned about tapping into the getting into San Francisco and starting your kind of startup journey, right? Because you before you go into San Francisco, I assume you haven't really thought about getting into startup.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I had never considered it. Wasn't even on my radar, especially I think as someone who was non-technical. It wasn't even, I didn't live in that world at all.
Yeah. So now once you get into tech and once you start your startup, what do you find the skills or things that you need to know before you can actually be better at doing what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think being self-motivated and self-driven is obviously super important, because there's nobody else, there's no boss, there's no school, there's no company that's telling you what you need to do. You need to go and figure it out, and you need to be disciplined enough to actually do it. And then you have to be pretty resourceful, especially if you're starting out. Let's say you can't raise funding or you decide not to initially, then there's a lot of things that you have to do with not many resources. So either you have to become a subject matter expert yourself and figure out how to do it, or you have to convince other people to join you and do that. And there's so many ways to go about solving a problem. So you have to figure out what's the best way for you at the time with the resources that you have.
Yeah, that's great. I think with startup, if you're starting as like a founder, then you need to wear multiple hats, right? And most of the time you're not really good at everything, but you have to do everything. Unless you have like a good co-founding team where it's quite balanced out, that everyone can cover most of the required area that you need to excel on early on. So you mentioned about building and funding the team that is actually, can have the talent to do what your maybe complement what your skill level or skill set is. Like, how do you build your team that, in Altcoin Fantasy back then? You and your founders start this startup, and what are the initial skill set that your initial team has, the co-founding team?
Yeah, so it was actually just myself and my co-founder. He's an engineer, so he was the tech side, and then I did pretty much everything else. So because I had a background in product management, and then I'd done a lot of marketing stuff just for fun. Those were sort of my skill sets. So initially it was just kind of the two of us, and we actually not outsourced, but we found a lot of overseas talent, which was much cheaper. So we hired people in Europe, and then we hired people in Asia. And because of, using US dollars, which is what we operated on as a company, it allowed us to hire a lot more people so that we could stretch our dollar a lot more. And then you find, really creative ways, like the growth hacking workshop that I did. A lot of that stuff was just, how can we do a lot without having any money? And it's crazy, like how creative you can be. There's so many resources out there on ways to grow and get users for free, or how to market for free. You can get partnerships so that you don't have to pay any money. Like, there's so many tactics to do that. So I think just always trying to be resourceful and also open to learning from other people and learning what's out there, because there's so much in the startup world, obviously, and things are always changing, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, so many people have done it before, and while your startup might obviously be different, there's so many things you can learn from what people do. And I still read and consume a lot of content about what startups are doing today.
That's good. So you mentioned about because the US dollars can kind of get you more talents because you're hiring overseas. So that is, if I remember correct, that is before COVID happens, and that is like before every company is a working company. So how do you manage that at that point? Like, when you start, do you have that in mind that we are going to build like a distributed team? Because one, the resources, you can get more from your resources, and also you can be more flexible and work anywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it wasn't really an option to hire people locally, just because we hadn't raised any money, so we were just bootstrapping, and we had a little bit of money that we were generating from partnerships, but nothing that we could really hire talent here or in the US. So it was something that was born out of necessity. And I think with the crypto space in particular, what you see is that, because of the ethos behind crypto, which is decentralization as a philosophy, companies are in the crypto space, they don't believe that they have to hire locally. They are, for the most part, distributed, and they've always kind of been that way. And so I think for us, having been a crypto startup, that was always something that was natural. I think obviously with the shift with COVID and people going to remote work, now it's much more common. At the time, I think it was the same kind of feeling where if you were in crypto, that was just what you did. You just hired wherever, because talent doesn't just live in one place. And then if you could use your dollar much more effectively, then all the better.
That's good. That's good. So when you build your team, you hire remotely, and where do you find the, I assume you kind of open up and doesn't really, prioritize on where the talent is located, as long as they are, they're good at what they're doing. What are the locations, or what are the countries that you find having the best talent for for this kind of work?
You know, I don't think it's actually country specific. I think it's about being creative where to find people. So for us, because we were a crypto company, we posted on crypto specific job sites like cryptocurrencyjobs.com. So we had, you know, somebody in the US, we had somebody in Mexico, we had somebody in the Philippines, we had somebody in Hungary. So we kind of had a very global team. And what was actually really interesting for us though was that a lot of our initial employees actually came from our user base. So, you know, we had people reaching out to us and they're like, oh, we love your product. We really love what you're doing. Like, let me know how I can help you. And they didn't even want to get paid, but as they started to help us out a bit, we wanted to bring them on board because obviously passion for your product does go a long way. I feel like, you know, depending on what the skills are, like for example, community management, that's something that you can learn and that you can teach. But somebody believing in your mission and your vision is really, really hard to find. And so when you find those people who want to help you without any gain on their end, I think they become really, really good employees and really strong employees.
Yeah, and I think that's essential to build the initial core team too. As if you build and expand your team, if you have a team that believe in your mission and vision, they are more engaged and they will be more you know, it will be easier for you to attract the next wave of the talents as well, right? So with that, you know, you mentioned they are all pretty much global. How do you manage them and how do you keep them? Well, I know they are more engaged because they buy into the mission, but how do you keep them engaged and how do you keep the manage the team now that they're in different time zone? Because I find that, you know, time zone is such a challenging stuff with a remote work team and distributed. Like, how do you kind of manage that and how do you manage the team that way?
Yeah, so some of our team worked on like overlapping hours. So obviously we're in PST and they would work like overlapping for the most part. So for our employees in Asia, obviously that was a tough time zone for them. But then I think they're used to doing that because they have worked for other companies in North America in the past. And then, you know, for anybody who's read up on remote work before, Matt Mullenweg, who is the founder and CEO of Automatic, which is the company behind WordPress, he talks about different types of remote organizations. So you have like your level 1 and then your level 2 and your level 3. And level 2 is like, you know, for the most part, you communicate online and you have some meetings, but not necessarily all of your meetings where you make decisions. And then level 3 is sort of asynchronous communication where you don't need to work on the same time zone. You just communicate through documents and Slack, etc. And then you kind of get your work done on your own schedule. And I think it's really interesting with COVID because, you know, we kind of started with this reluctance for remote work, right? Like even tech companies like Google, they just didn't really allow you to work from home much, if at all. And now we're moving to this new world where everybody kind of expects that remote work is the future. But I think that does a lot in terms of communication, especially with talent overseas or in different countries. So how do you balance that? And I think for us, we communicated really closely. And because we were working on very similar time zones, it wasn't as much of an issue. But I think definitely for larger companies where you might have, you know, hundreds of employees and some of them are in different time zones, then moving to that level 3 asynchronous communication company really makes a lot of sense. It's very difficult, obviously, because not having meetings and working on the same time zone and having to wait for someone to respond to you is difficult. But I think it's been shown to improve innovation and creativity and also communication.
Yeah, I find that with like, you know, a distributed team and also people from other countries and other background and other culture, you get the diversity and you get the, you know, the perspective and ideas from different parts of the world. So, you know, if creativity is a part that you need to be working on in your startup, I think that I found out that kind of brings a lot of different ideas from different places because they have different backgrounds. So they're, you know, they're not thinking alike, like not exactly alike. Like, you know, that creates more more opinion and also more ideas that way. I find that, you know, when Career In decide to expand, we kind of expand, and because we we expand when we are doing during COVID, so it's all remote too, right? So we have students and volunteers from across North America, right? So people are in Eastern time zone, some of them are in Pacific time zone, but you know, we find ways to work, and that creates a opportunity for us to actually, you know, hire more international students. And part of that is because we find that international students, they are having a hard time getting, especially in Canada. I find that because I'm an immigrant myself, right? So I find that it's hard to get your first job without a Canadian experience, and that's why we opened up the internship program with Career In, and we hire a team of international students to get them work with us, and also to gain the experience of working remotely, and also working in a Canadian organization, so that they can actually get the experience, and then in turn they may be able to get a better chance of landing their first job here. But I found that, you know, the diversity in the ideas and you know, the perspective is really good to have in the team as well. What do you find when you hire like a globally distributed team? What kind of advantage do you find, you know, by doing that?
Well, you know, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned it's difficult for some of these international students to find jobs, or at least their first job, without Canadian experience, because what I found, having, you know, worked with had a crypto startup, I traveled a lot overseas. So, you know, we would go to Europe, we would go to Asia. We had a lot of partners in those places. So we would do conferences, or we'd go and see them in person. And it was just such a rich experience to go to all of these countries and actually see how they do business, because you know, when you're so used to the way that you grow up and you're so used to people doing things in a similar fashion, your mind isn't expanded. But when you go to Asia, for example, and you see how high tech they are in China with all of their apps and cashless systems, and even like the way that they do business, like literally, you know, if I wanted to have somebody come and repair my broken bicycle tire while I'm riding a bicycle, I could pull up an app and have somebody be there in 10 minutes and repair my bicycle. Like, it's crazy, right? And you know, we need to learn more from other places, how they do business, how they think about product development, and even like cultural things, because how you go to market in one country is going to be very different from another. And I think having that experience and having people on your team who have seen that or have interacted with products that are really different, I think that just really brings a wealth of creativity and knowledge, because then you get that advantage in your company as well, because you have a disparity of ideas that come in that you can leverage, versus being in an echo chamber where everybody's thinking the same.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great way to segue into traveling, right? Because you mentioned you travel a lot, and you know, that's the perfect timing to get into the you know, how to become a digital nomad. So you know, with remote work, I think that opens up the you know, and more companies, you know, being like a remote working environment, it opens the door for traveling and working at the same time. Maybe for one certain company, if it's big enough where they have different offices across the world, then you may be able to just, you know, shift to other city and work for, you know, a month or a couple of weeks here and there. But you know, for startups, you know, what kind of things that you think will possibly working in this kind of digital nomad environment? How do people, you know, try to start being a digital nomad?
Yeah, so I think there's two paths, right? So if you want to be a founder and have your own startup versus wanting to work for a company. So I'll talk about being a founder first. I think one thing that I discovered, which is pretty amazing and is probably not common knowledge, is that a lot of countries, they realize that tech and innovation is the future, and they have spent a lot of money and effort and time to put programs in place to encourage really talented, smart people to come to their country and build a startup. So for example, we actually got a government grant from the Hong Kong government, and it paid for a lot of our traveling expenses, a lot of our business expenses, and you don't need to be a Hong Kong citizen to even do that. And I know that they have similar programs in Latin America. I know that China has a lot of robust programs for this. So that is definitely one thing that if you want to do the startup route specifically and you're looking for funding or grants, then definitely look into a country that you were interested in visiting or living, and then see what grants are available there, because that is like a really big hack that I don't think a lot of people know about, and definitely one worth looking into. So if anyone's curious, I can definitely send you more information on that.
Yeah.
And then the other route, so if you want to work for a company and be a digital nomad, I think there's a couple of ways to do this, right? So either you can work for a company or you can go and be a creator. There's so many people who are doing like YouTube, Instagram, some kind of social media, or even I signed up for a TikTok account and I was really curious from a product perspective how it's built. And one thing I noticed is that with TikTok in particular, which it does much better than Instagram, I think there's a lot of Amazon affiliates who are making a lot of money from TikTok just because of the way that the platform is built, because it's like really short videos, and there's a lot of people who are selling things from Amazon who are signed up on the Amazon affiliate program, that they're getting so many sales because there's so many people on TikTok and they're looking, and like there's this virality loop that happens. So I think there's a lot of really creative ways that you can make money if you don't want to necessarily work for a company, you just want to run your own schedule. But there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of companies who are moving to remote work now that are willing to hire employees from all over the world. And there's sites dedicated to remote job postings. So I think there's definitely a lot of avenues if you're trying to be a remote worker or like a digital nomad.
That's good. I think I found the insights for starting a startup in different countries and getting grants or funding from those countries or cities to attract that is actually a good insight, because I can share to my community, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people will take those getting to travel to a new country or city that you want to travel to and getting the funding to start a startup there is like a win-win situation for everyone involved. So that's great. Now talking about digital nomad and getting that kind of lifestyle, what are the things that tips, advice that you give people that are trying to get and become like a digital nomad?
Yeah, I mean, for me, one thing that's always top of mind is internet connectivity. So obviously with COVID right now, we're not really traveling anywhere.
Yeah.
Although I do spend a lot of time in my RV. And so when we're traveling around in our RV, we do have to look at internet connectivity there. But we probably spend like easily $200 to $300-400 on internet, on data sometimes, depending on where we are and how much data we need. So I think that's a big thing. Also, when you're traveling, you have to think about travel insurance. So especially if you're going to be traveling overseas or even to the US, then you got to make sure that you're covered. And then there's rules around how long you can be in a place or whether you need visas, etc. But then even as, say, a Canadian citizen, when you leave and you go somewhere else, your health insurance for MSP plus your travel insurance on top of that, which depends on MSP, they have conditions. So I don't think you're allowed to travel for more than 6 months out of the year. So that's something to be conscious of, because maybe you need to actually come back to Canada for a short time so you can make sure that you keep your insurance and your MSP in place.
Yeah, to refresh the countdown.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think safety obviously is a really big important thing. So making sure that you're doing research on where you're going ahead of time and researching cultural things as well. For the most part, I think every place that I've been, I've never had any issues. Like I've, knock on wood, but we've never had anybody steal anything or been pickpocketed or anything. But then also we're very conscious when we go to places that we're not being flashy or, wearing our big gold chain or something.
Yeah.
Right?
You don't want to be the easy target, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think something else, which I'm not sure if other people do this, but what I find is a wealth of information, and that's like such a good experience is when you talk to local people, like anybody, right? Let's say, for example, you're in Asia and you're talking to somebody like who's driving Uber or Didi or like some taxi. It's crazy how many tips they can give you about places to go, places not to go, what to eat, what you should see, things to watch out for. Like local people are generally super, super nice and really, really friendly as long as you're respectful towards them. And they can point you in so many cool places that you otherwise can't find because, you know, it's something that's only known to locals.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight because, you know, it's like being a visitor. You want to get some insights on not just the tourist kind of spot, like those you find online all the time, right? But the ones, you know, the spots or the places that only the locals know is good, right? You don't want to just go to where the tourists are, and you get to actually travel and actually get to know more about that place like a local, right? So that's good. Now, in terms of you know, staying in a place at a longer period of time, like almost like living for like let's say more than a couple of weeks or like a month, more than a month. I know you are big in Airbnb, right? So what are the things that you kind of have tips on, you know, staying at somewhere else when you do remote working?
So for me, when I was traveling a lot overseas, one of the things I looked at a lot was, is there a co-working space or some kind of community close to where I'm going to be staying? Because I also really wanted to get to know people in local communities. So we spent a lot of time in Singapore and Hong Kong, for example, and we wanted to make sure that we connected with the people in the tech space there. So we went to a lot of co-working spaces. We went to a lot of meetups and events because we wanted to learn from the people in that community. So that is definitely one thing I think that's super important. Again, internet connectivity. There's a lot of places where you can find cheap accommodations. Like surprisingly, I think in I can't remember. There's a couple of places in Europe where you can actually find, you know, you can rent an apartment for really, really cheap for a month. And then of course, same thing in Asia. So it's like picking those spots that probably are a little bit off the beaten track that you can go to. And there's so many communities that are actually dedicated to remote work and remote travel. So I think joining those communities, whether it's like Facebook or a forum, they're a wealth of information as well, because there's actually a lot of people that I've met from those communities, and a lot of them are actually willing to host you as well, depending on where you're going. So I think the more connections that you make all around the world, the, you know, wherever you go, you kind of have a home, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think that's always a good thing and advantage when you know someone in different places as well. When you travel, you get to first you have someone to you know, to hang out with, and also you get to know more about that city or that location much more when you have some local as like an insight, right?
Yeah. So and the other thing too about that is when we were in Indonesia and in Singapore as well, what was really interesting is when we talked to people there were a lot of things that we learned about the culture there that actually affects things like how you do business. I'll give you an example. Indonesia, there was a lot of talk a couple of years ago about how Indonesia is the next China because it has such a huge population. And so on the surface, when you look at it and you analyze it as a country and you analyze the market, if you were going to say, okay, I'm going to launch a product there, there's a lot of research that you can do from the surface that makes sense. But when you actually go there and you talk to the people, what you realize is that with the culture in Indonesia, the culture is very different. So a lot of people there, and you know, of course I'm generalizing, but there's this pervasiveness in the culture that people are sort of more chill, and they, you know, somebody who was Indonesian told me a joke like, oh, as long as they have like 3 cigarettes and dinner, they'll be happy. And that behavior though has a huge impact on how that country will develop. So if you're looking at Indonesia as the next China, there's all these smaller things that actually really affect how that country is going to develop and whether it's a good market for you to expand into, that you're not able to understand if you're not there, you're not talking to people who are local. So I think wherever you go, if you are trying to start a startup, like talking to people who are local, again, just gives you a wealth of knowledge about that place. And you can understand things that aren't apparent if you're just reading up about it and you're not actually staying there.
Yeah, that's good. Now let's switch gear and talk a little bit about different sector. I know you're working with GrowFlow, which is, talk a little bit about GrowFlow and the background so that the audience can know a little bit more about that.
Sure, yeah. So GrowFlow is a B2B SaaS tool for cannabis operators in the US. And I lead product marketing there and then new market expansion as well. So we're expanding to other states in the US and I'm basically managing that initiative. And I joined June of last year. So it's just coming up to about a year now.
Yeah, that's cool. How do you like it so far? It's been a year of working. I assume you're working remotely too, right?
I am, yeah. So we're a fully remote company. So it's nice because I have flexibility to kind of be anywhere, which is really awesome. And then also our team is remote. So going back to your point earlier about remote hiring, I've had to do that here as well for my team now. So it's definitely interesting interviewing people remotely.
Yeah. What kind of challenges you went through when interviewing and recruiting remotely now?
I think that because it's remote, you have a lot more people who are applying. So the talent pool is much wider, which is really interesting. Like I know, for example, for some of the positions that we have up, there are literally over 1,000 applicants, which is crazy, like for one job. And so I think that especially for our generation, it's really desirable to have a remote position. So a lot of people will trade off, say, a higher salary to get that flexibility. And then in terms of recruitment itself, so we have a really robust recruitment process and we have like a process that we follow, a methodology, which helps us a lot to keep our hiring pretty consistent. So it's been a good experience for sure. I think GrowFlow has done a really great job at putting a methodology into place so that culture is really important when we are hiring somebody, and then we can continue to make sure that people we hire match our culture internally.
Yeah. So in GrowFlow, how do you do that? By what kind of screen or what kind of method you put together to actually keep the culture while you expand? Because I think that is really key for a lot of startups when they grow, right? If you go rapidly and you get like all sort of people joining together, but they're not within like a good culture, or you actually build a culture because you're getting a lot of different people, because culture is actually built by the people that you work with, right? So how do you keep that the ideal culture that you had in mind when you go this?
Yeah, so we have a culture workbook essentially. So it's a document that talks about all of our cultures, what each culture means and why we chose that culture and how that shows up. And so I think the first step is that if you're going to hire for culture, you have to be very clear about what your culture actually is. And everybody has to be on the same page, because especially when you're small, I remember when we had the startup, we talked about culture, but it wasn't super top of mind. And I think our culture kind of represented something a little bit different for everybody. So having a clear culture that everybody can point to and say, okay, like I understand what our culture is and I'm in agreement with this, that's definitely like the starting point. And then we also have a culture fit interview. So first there's a phone screen interview and then there's a culture fit interview. And the culture fit interview is done by, a lot of people. So it's not just like 5 people do it, so that takes out a lot of bias. And there's always 2 people that do the interview, again, to take out bias. And we usually ask questions that are related to trying to tease out like our cultures specifically. So we'll ask questions that have the candidate demonstrate an example of them acting or not acting in this culture, and then based on that we make an assessment. So
basically, so you figure out to see if they will fit the ideal cultural profile, so that you can, as you grow, you'll be keeping that culture, company culture in place. How big is the team right now at GrowFlow?
We're about 100. When I started, we were about 40. So we've grown a
Yeah.
lot in the last year.
Yeah, so that's very good. Like now with you as a head of marketing and new market expansion, share a little bit of insight what you have to do. And I assume a lot of the attendees here, some of them are new into or they're graduating soon, or they're getting into startup. They want to know different roles and what kind of career path they would like to take. Like share a little bit about that career insight to the audience.
Yeah, for sure. So my background is in marketing, product strategy, and innovation and growth. And so this role has, I guess, probably a lot of that. So one of the jobs that I do is product marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time a product is ready to go to market,
Mm-hmm.
then I help create documentation for our internal team so that they're
Mm-hmm.
ready to support. And then I create a go-to-market strategy for that feature itself. So that's, communicating with our customers,
Mm-hmm.
creating any marketing materials, doing any ads or social media pushes, etc. So like
Mm-hmm.
the whole life cycle of actually taking that product to market.
Yeah.
And then my other job is to look at our new market expansion and
Mm-hmm.
strategy. So
Mm-hmm.
I created a playbook for us to actually go to market. And then I have a team that is focused on like customers, sales, and
Mm-hmm.
then the product. So every
Mm-hmm.
time we go into a new market, there's product market fit that we have to reach.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are doing a lot of discovery, talking to customers. We're trying to sell to customers, onboard them, and then learn from them.
Yeah.
And then we also have a customer person supporting them. So, it's sort of like this cross collaborative team where
Mm-hmm.
we have to expand into a new market. It's a lot like if you think about Uber or Airbnb, every time they go into a new market, there's things that they have to do to expand into that new market. So we have a similar process to that.
That's cool. So in terms of new market, is that city specific or would that be like country specific for your case?
Right now we're focusing on state, but it will be, we'll expand that to different countries.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
So you're focusing on US at the moment. I assume if it's states.
Yes.
Is it in Canada yet? Like or
not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah. I guess state is that's 50 states to expand and conquer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to be done. Cannabis is such a emerging and also fast growing sector.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of advice you can give for people that are interested in this industry or vertical? For them to get more insight or to learn more about this industry to see if this is something they really want to get into going forward.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for any role or any industry that people are interested in, like the first step is always to read and research, because one, it's going to help you understand, okay, is this actually something I'm interested in? But two, when you go to talk to people in the industry, or when you go to interview, then having that knowledge up front gives you a lot of credibility, because that person is going to think, okay, well, this person's already done a lot of the pre-work. They've taken the time and energy to understand this industry. And so they're going to be a lot more open to helping you or hiring you depending on what you're looking for. So, definitely that. And I think if you're interested in learning more about the industry and what kind of roles are available and how the industry is growing, then again, like reaching out to people, I would say for the most part, most people are super friendly and open. And if you just reach out to them and say, hey, like I'm really interested in this industry, I'd love to hear what your role is like. Like, do you have 15 minutes? If you don't do it, you're going to get a no. So you might as well do it.
Exactly.
And I'm sure that most of the time you're going to get a yes.
Yeah, and that's why I would say Career In is trying to help make this easier by redoing all those outreach and redoing all those talk and interview with people, so that you don't have to not everyone have to outreach to those group of people. We can do it, and then when you go to our event or watch our interview videos, you'll get the insight that you want, right? So that's why we're trying to help by getting those career insights up to and get to the audience that are interested in this area. Talking
That's
about
awesome.
Different industry, you were in the crypto industry earlier with Altcoin. Let's share a little bit about that as well, because I think a lot of people are interested in this area too.
Yeah. So it's funny. When I moved from crypto to the cannabis industry, I was joking to my husband. I said I love to work in one shady industry to another. So yeah, crypto is, I'm actually still pretty involved in crypto. So I advise a couple of companies in the crypto space, and Altcoin Fantasy is still running, but we're not really doing any development on it. So Altcoin Fantasy is an app. It's still active, that is dedicated to helping people learn about the crypto space and crypto trading in particular. And it's basically a simulated exchange where you can practice trading, and we have different competitions that you can compete in and actually win, cool prizes and rewards. So, we saw an opportunity where a lot of people were really interested into crypto, but they were really worried and afraid of losing money. So we wanted to solve that problem. And it's interesting because we started in 2018, like the beginning of 2018. So right after the crash. So it was like terrible timing. And we did that for 2 years, and we had like over 300,000 users. So, we had a decent amount of traction, but we decided we were having some issues with Google Play. So we decided not to continue development. And then late last year, the crypto market started coming back. And so now there's a lot of people who are really interested in the space again. And we're seeing a lot of people come to our app. And so timing for startups is so important, right? Like you can't control that. If we had waited 6 more months, it would have been a completely different story. So that's one of the things that you can never control about your startup.
Yeah. I think timing is such a important thing that, looking back, you probably know, if it's a good timing or bad timing. But when you're doing it, sometimes you cannot control that, right? So but it is good. I want to be mindful of time, and Logan is just just in time at the right pace at the right time now, because we are wrapping up for the Q&A section. Logan, can you help let us know if there's any questions from the audience?
Sure, sounds great. So yeah, we are moving into the Q&A, and Kenneth, one thing I am supposed to ask you, are you okay with us sharing this video on YouTube after?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Perfect. So there are 2 questions in the Q&A. One of them is more general, and one of them is maybe a bit more specific. So I'll start with the more specific one. What are some of your, I guess this would be maybe to Cynthia directly, what are some of your favorite cities for staying as a digital nomad, and why?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I spent some time in Bali and in Canggu. And for anybody who's ever done any research on digital nomads, that's like top 1, I think, for digital nomads as a city. It's such a cool place. It's this really weird mix of East and West. So you've got the Eastern Asian culture, but then you also have a lot of Australians and Europeans who have come and changed it a bit. It's a surfside town, and there's a lot of infrastructure built for people who are working there, and it's like fairly inexpensive and it's beautiful. So definitely that is a place I love. I also really love Singapore. It's really safe. It reminds me very much of Canada. Food is amazing. It's so good and it's so cheap. And they are really developing their tech ecosystem and community there. So I think there's a lot to learn and explore. And then because they're so connected to other places in Asia, I think that there's a lot of people that you can meet, and you can start to learn about how Asia operates as a community and as a hub of business.
That's great.
Great, thanks for that answer. And the other question, as I said, is a bit more general. So maybe both of you have some input on here. What are some of the best ways to break into startups without any prior experience?
I think we talked a little bit about that, but we can expand on this, Cynthia, if you will.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think understanding where you want to go in the tech scene. So maybe starting with what kind of roles you're looking at, and then talking to people in those roles to get an idea of what they do, whether it's something you'd be interested in, and then potentially be able to actually land the role. But again, doing side projects is huge. And also, talking to people in the community. And then I think hackathons also is something I'm a huge fan of. And something that I think maybe people have a misunderstanding about is that you have to be technical to attend a hackathon. I'm not technical. I attended my first hackathon in Vegas, and there were a lot of developers there. I was a non-technical person, but there's a lot that you can do even as a non-technical person. So you can be the one presenting, you can project or product manage the product that you're going to be building. You can talk to the sponsors. Like, there's just a lot that you can learn. So I think it's definitely an under leveraged tool to actually start getting exposure to what the tech scene is like, and then meeting really cool people in the space too. And then again, talking to people and reaching out to people to get guidance and intros.
Yeah, I think those are very good. I also add onto it and want to say you might want to also figure out what kind of working environment you're looking, because in tech, there is the startup where it is like small team, right? Like less than 5 people. You have to work and kind of get involved in pretty much every single thing, no matter what your job title is. Like even CEO or whoever you are getting into, right? You have to wear multiple hats and you have to get your hands dirty on whatever that is need to be done. You have to do, right? And then you can see if you are better at having building process for going company. So there are companies that or startup that is going and they start to need a process. Like doing things on the fly is not viable anymore. They need to have process so that they can start building the team, so that they can have people to keep working on it. So if you're good at building process, that may be a good stage of company you get into. Or if you enjoy to have existing process to follow, right? Then you might want to join a more established or more bigger tech companies where they are already 100 or 100 plus people, right? Where things are in place and you go in and you become the contributor of whatever special role you're getting into, right? So it's depending on the working environment that you're comfortable with, right? I'm the sort of person that I thrive in the chaotic states. So getting into the early startup is always good for me, because I don't like to follow process. I want to create and just get my hands dirty to whatever that I need to do. I assume Cynthia, you've been to both worlds now, right? You've been to like your own startup, you joined GrowFlow as when they were 40-ish people. Now that it's 100, I assume that they are building the process and actually expanding now. What kind of insights in that perspective you can give to the the audience if they are interested in joining different stages of tech companies?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really, really great point. Like, if you join a company that is at a certain stage that's not right for your interest and skill set, you can have a really bad experience or image of the tech industry. But there's like founder market fit and there's founder stage fit. So I think this is the same thing with employees. Like you said, you have to figure out what it is that you want to do, because if you're somebody who doesn't thrive in chaos, like definitely don't join an early stage startup, because you're going to hate it. But if you're somebody who loves building things from scratch and you're like, oh, I don't want to deal with bureaucracy, then an early stage startup is for you. But then you also have to understand the trade-offs. Obviously, with a smaller startups, they're not as stable, right? So you're going to have that uncertainty versus you're at a company that's raised like a Series C. They're probably very stable, but then they might move a bit slower.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for the insight, Cynthia. Do we have more questions, Logan?
Yeah, one more just came in.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to create a cannabis business?
Oh, I actually joined a cannabis startup, so it's not my startup. But for anybody who is interested in cannabis, especially in Canada since it's legal, it's a hugely, hugely growing industry, both Canada and the US, but also internationally as well. So I predict that within the next 10 years, it's going to be a huge industry, like massively global. And so if you are interested in something that's like more cutting edge, that is new, it's definitely an area where there's a lot of opportunity, whether you're joining a company or starting your own, because it's still pretty nascent. So there's a lot of need for really good tools and companies.
Yeah, I think one good thing about joining something that is relatively new is that the opportunity for growth, especially as a a career, right? It's
Yeah.
such a huge thing. I remember, 10, 20 years ago when digital marketing is starting to become a thing, right? And social media, it become like a more alarm, right? That is a long time ago. I assume a lot of the audience that are younger, they probably, they're still very young at that point. But I was with my own recruiting agency back then, and we recruit a lot of different roles. And I see that people that are starting to get into digital marketing at the very, very early stage, they got to become the manager like 2 years later or 1 year later, because they're the only one that knows things. Like, the traditional marketers, they don't know nothing about digital marketing. So they're not good at those roles. And that creates so much and so many opportunity for people that are new to the scene, because they're the first one to kind of like the pioneer, right?
Right.
So they get to know the ins and outs of that, and they become the ones that benefit from the growth of that vertical or industry, right? So I think that is a great opportunity for people that are interested in that.
Yeah, that's true, because I think if you are having difficulties finding a job in traditional tech, then industries like crypto and cannabis, or anything that is sort of up and coming and growing really, really fast, they are in desperate need of really talented people. And they do tend to be more open to bringing somebody on who might not have the experience or the knowledge, but they have a deep drive to learn, and they have a curiosity, and they're super scrappy. I think those qualities and values are super important to companies in these new spaces. So if you are really interested in, like Kenneth said, being early on and developing an expertise in these new areas, like I highly, highly recommend it, because you can stand out so much more than if you went to a company like Oracle or Facebook or Google.
That's great. Logan, do we have more incoming questions?
I think that's it for questions. We have about 3 minutes left, so I don't know if there's one more quick comment either of you want to make, but you're welcome to.
Well, I would like to thank Cynthia for coming in to share all her insights. And thank you, Cynthia, for sharing with us the insights on digital nomad, and also the different career insight that she had with us. And I think the audience learned a lot more about that because of that. And thank you, Logan, as well, and the Vancouver Startup Week for organizing this wonderful event every year. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone that's come to our session today. I hope you enjoyed and learned something. Looking forward to meet with you again in the future, virtually and hopefully in person sooner than later.